Hey guys, Sister Liz here. You're about to hear an awesome episode with Sister Lisa Laguna on vocations and discernment. Share this with a friend, somebody who's thinking about God's call for their life. They could really benefit from all of these frequently asked questions. And while you're at it, we would love if you do a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It means a lot to us and it helps out the podcast as well. God bless. Enjoy the episode. All right. Well, welcome back to the podcast, everybody. This is Sister Liz, and I'm here with an old friend, a friend of the podcast, and Sister Lisa Laguna. Happy to have you again. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Thanks. Glad to be back with you.
For the folks who don't know you, Sister Lisa, you were on our podcast way back, season 2, episode 7, and then again, season 3, episode 24. So this could be like a trifecta or a trinity of vocation, frequently asked questions. And if you are a binge listener that wants to learn more about vocation stuff, that would be a great place, those episodes, including this one. So, do you want to talk about the discernment weekend you just had and how great it was and how many girls came?
Yeah, so we just had a come and see this last weekend in California here, Los Altos Hills. And we had 16 ladies attend. And it actually really was a great weekend. It was definitely a Holy Spirit inspired weekend. And they were from all over the Western United States, from all the way from New Mexico to Arizona, California, and all over California up and down the coast. So it was a great weekend. It was busy and full and wonderful. And it was like a precursor to this frequently asked questions.
So you are ready.
So we're ready.
So this is an interesting one to start with, like people having spiritual directors, but then people talking to vocation directors. Do you want to just give a quick little distinction for folks out there when they're talking to communities? Should they consider that a form of spiritual direction?
No. And the reason is, it doesn't mean that vocation directors can't give spiritual advice, but it comes down to an ethical boundary. So a spiritual director, it comes down to this word called agency. A spiritual director is a quote agent of the person that they're accompanying. A vocation director is the agent of her community. And that means that everything she hears and possesses and learns about a candidate belongs to her general superior or her provincial superior. And that's different for a spiritual director who owes agency to the directee. And so those two roles are absolutely they're not the same. They're not compatible. A vocation director should never act as a spiritual director. Doesn't mean you can't give spiritual advice and that you don't accompany people in a spiritual way. But it's really important that a person who's discerning, a discerner has somebody who is their agent too, not just somebody who represents the agent of a community or whatever we want to call it. But somebody has to kind of have their best interest. Not that we don't have the interest of a discerner at heart, but at the end of the day, we represent in our case, our visitatrix, our provincial, and that's where our agency lies. And so I think it's really important, and we have to be really straightforward about that when we're meeting with people, and be really clear about that.
So when people, I think spiritual direction, we could see that as sort of a tool in the toolbox of discernment resources for people who are thinking about their life choices. And so, prayer is an important part of that. Maybe you can speak to, for those who maybe feel stuck of, I've been thinking about it, I'm not quite sure what the next steps are. Maybe folks have been thinking about it for a long time. Mm-hmm. At what point does it go from, I had a thought, I'm praying about it, I keep praying about it, to now I need to do something.
Um, I often, when I have conversations like this with women who have been, and even young men that I talk to, lots of folks come to talk to me. Um, People who have been in discernment for a long time and haven't kind of moved the needle on that. Discernment is not unlike discernment about consecrated life is not unlike discernment about marriage or single life, whatever. Um, Sometimes when people tell me, I feel like I'm called to marriage, and I often say, well, is there a person? In other words, we're not called to an idea or a concept. We're called, like, if you're called to marriage, you're called to marry a person. So if there's not a person involved in that calling after a certain amount of time, then I question, like are we actively engaged in that discernment process of, seeking this call to marriage? The same would be true for consecrated life, right? Or priesthood, whatever it is that we're feeling called to. Like, if I'm discerning a calling to consecrated life, then I should at some point I'm actively seeking a relationship with a community. I'm visiting, just like I would be visiting and regularly meeting with somebody I'm dating. There's actual visits happening. We're getting to know each other. There's opportunities for that happening. It's not just an idea. I'm not just reading books about it. I'm not just praying about it. At some point, we're forming an actual relationship with real live people.
And I think of, Googling is one of these magic things that wasn't around when some of us were younger, but
Yeah, same.
it can it can work wonders to see,
Mhm.
does the community have a website? Do they have an active social media presence? And those things are great in the initial stages to kind of see what's up. What are people saying? What does the community say about themselves? And then there's a point at which you have to do something. And
Correct.
I
And
know
what
I
you said the
yeah.
right word. You said initial. That's a very initial thing. It's sort of like these folks who are on online dating apps, which also I don't think existed when we were younger. Um, I'm not really sure, but anyway, it's very initial, right? That's still not a relationship. I think some people form some kind of a relationship in the virtual world, but it's still virtual.
Mm.
It's not. It's not yet reality until we're together face to face. So I think, again, there has to be a commitment. I heard a talk one time by some guy named Terry Hershey, who's um, a public speaker, and his talk was on friendship. And he said, if you want to show me that you're a good friend, let me see your calendar. Let me see, like, your physical commitment, your real life IRL commitment to the people that you say you're friends with, right? And I think that the same should be true for discernment. If you're saying you're really in discernment, show me your calendar. Show me where that those commitments show up in your life.
There's a lot of folks out there who have maybe some anxieties or fear barriers that, um, I would call it the what ifs of, thinking about religious life, because it's not normal in the sense of not a lot of people do it. Some folks don't even know that there are still sisters and priests, that young people are still making this decision. And so that's part of why we do this podcast and other things on social media, to let people know, yes, people are still called to religious life. Um, but, I had a discerner ask me, well, I still think about being married and having kids, or I still feel attraction to guys out there. I still have these feelings. Um, what what do I do with that? And what if it doesn't work out? What if I enter and then it's not the right thing? Is that a mistake? These are some of the, at least, common questions that I've heard, from young people, and I'm sure those of us our age were the same. Um, how do I navigate the fears that
Mhm.
might keep me from moving forward?
Yeah, I was listening to somebody share, in fact, this last weekend about, hopefully as they move forward, the doubts will go away. And so the bad news is that, like, no, for the most part, the doubts don't go away. Um, it's that our faith increases, right? So, and our trust increases, and the people, and first of all, in God, right? That, um, as we feel more secure in our calling, but also in the and in the relationships that we're forming, either with the person we think we're going to marry, or in the community that we feel like we might join, or the diocese that we're going to, whatever this relationship is that we're forming. So I think that's what's really significant, right? That discernment and that commitment is not an individual thing, right? It is always steeped in community and relationship. So as we form this trust, as we're moving forward, it's like, no, I'm still not sure, but what I feel secure in is that I'm supposed to just take the next step. Sometimes what we're afraid is, like this, just like going on the first date. Like, I don't know if I can marry this person. Well, all we're talking about is the next date. We're not, you know, s- sometimes this anxiety increases because we're asking the wrong question in that moment. That question is, many dates down the line, but we overwhelm ourselves with the size of the question that we're trying to embrace in that moment. And maybe we're only supposed to answer, what am I supposed to do next? Like, am I, am I, I'm just supposed to say yes to the next thing. The next thing is, am I supposed to go on a date with this person? The next date, am I, am I supposed to discern with this community for now? Um, and if I just can embrace that, then my heart starts to grow. And if I fall in love, then you know what? You can say a lot of yeses when you're in love, and that's how people get married. And you say yes to somebody, you don't know who they're going to be in 10, 15, 20 years, because we don't know who we're going to be in 10, 15, 20 years. That's how we make vows, because we don't know. We're saying yes to a mystery, but we believe in the grace, and we embrace that grace, that we're going to have the grace to make that forever yes. I mean, that's how that works. But we have to just ask for that grace for that next yes. And one of the hard things is, and we talked a little bit about this weekend, is at some point those little yeses become a big yes. There's a big yes along the way that says this next yes means no to everything else. And that's sometimes where that's where we sort of we halt. This yes means no more dating. This yes means, and that could be true. This yes to this person I'm going to marry means that's to no to everybody else. This yes to this community, this yes to this calling, this yes to being a sister means no to all those other vocations. That's true no matter what vocation we're embracing. But what we don't realize until we're there is that God will give us the grace. I mean, our heart somehow expands to embrace it. And we don't have the strength to do it. And if we enter the journey thinking that we can, well, we've already kind of doomed ourselves. But God
Hmm.
can do it in us. I mean, God comes in and starts, preparing our heart, kind of starts setting up a little house, kind of starts, and then it increases, and it can do. God gives us, first of all, we already have everything we need, because we're people of the sacraments. We're baptized people. We're living this life. We already have what we need. But that grace comes into our heart, and it just expands, and we can do it. We can do things that we think we can't do right now, but we can do it. It's kind of
I
crazy.
I love the way you're talking about the heart, because I think that is a hallmark of a celibate vocation, is
Hmm.
that your heart can expand in a way that's different than I'm getting married to this one person. My primary,
Hmm.
vocation is to this group of people, these individuals, and everything else flows from that. And so as it relates to, attractions, as it relates to the idea of, you know, what if it's hard for me as a person to think about not being married or not having
Mhm.
kids? Um, if there's still that thought in someone's head, does that automatically negate a
Hmm.
call to religious life, consecrated life?
Right. No, in fact, nobody should come to consecrated life because they think that they, in other words, we don't come to run away from marriage, right? We don't come because we think, oh, guys, yuck, kids, yuck. That doesn't mean that some of us aren't clear about not being married. I mean, maybe that's one clear thing for some folks. So I don't want to deter that either. But we don't go to one vocation to run away from another vocation. That's also not the path. And um, just like times people get married and they fall in love with somebody else. I mean, because we're just humans and we live in a relationship not just with one person but with the world. Um, it's not uncommon for consecrated people to fall in love throughout their life with other humans too. That just kind of happens. Um, and to wonder, but the same thing, just like if that happens in the context of marriage, when it happens in the context of our life, we go back to the fact that we took vows and that we made a commitment. And it doesn't mean that sometimes people discern in another way when that happens. But the truth is that no, we spend our whole life rediscerning feelings and rediscerning our commitment all the time. And that's that's why we can't do it in solitariness. We have to always do it in community. We have to always do it with each other, um, so that I can bounce that off of my sister and say, "Hey, I'm struggling. And maybe I just acknowledge that this is happening. I take it to prayer. I'm living within the sacraments with it, so that I'm transparent about what's happening." Um, and often, well, at least so far in my life, it's been all that's been manageable. Um, Not a piece of cake, but I always am able to come back to these vows I have as a daughter of charity. And um, again, that doesn't mean that sometimes people don't discern in another way, but that reality is going to happen no matter what your vocation is. We're gonna be. I don't like the word tempted because I'm not sure that I, I think it's just you're just engaging the world around you. And if your heart is expanding and embracing the world, which is what we're called to do, we're called to see Christ in others. We're gonna love others. And sometimes we might be confused by that love, or we might misunderstand. Um, and so I just think we go back, we ask for the strength to be faithful to that vow, those vows that we made. And married couples have to do it too.
I think the point about feelings is important because um, sometimes what we feel can be an indication or a confirmation of this is a good direction or this is not a good direction.
Mhm.
And sometimes feelings need to be, like St. Paul tells us, to be tested, to be put up against our commitments and our faith. And, for folks who are looking at communities or visiting, how much should they listen to their feelings versus how much do they listen to their brain logic of, this is a positive thing about the community that I love, and this is like, oh, I'm not sure about this part. Um,
Mhm.
it's maybe a challenge for some folks who are maybe more intellectually driven, with pros and cons lists versus emotionally driven, like I feel or I sense uh, happiness when I'm around these people, or I sense like, ooh, some hesitation. So where is the happy medium, or how does God use those faculties of ours to direct us?
Well, I think, first of all, I think that our personality is 100% present in our journey, in our discernment journey. I think I I I wouldn't say that one has power over the other. I think that God takes us as we are. What I feel strongly about is that again, I'm going to go back to making sure that that whatever is happening inside of you, that it's whether it's in your head or it's in your heart, that there is, whether we're talking about your spiritual director, your vocation director, your detached prayer companion, that you're being transparent about what that is with with those folks, so that they can be your discerning companions. Because sometimes, like, I am a more heady person, right? And so I can talk myself through anything, and I can talk myself right out of something that God is just, I mean, there's just street signs flashing, and I'm like, oh, I'm just going to reason myself right out of this thing. Um, so I need my discerning companions for sure, who have been praying with me, and often the Holy Spirit is, screaming, and I'm reasoning my way right out of there. So I think that we have to always remember that I may not be able to interpret this by myself. And so often when I'm working with women, they're like, "Well, I discern this and I discern that," and I hear a lot of I. You got a little bit of my Cuban salt there.
Like,
Um,
I.
and I'm like, "Oh, it's so much I. Where's the we? Um, throw a little French in there. Um, and we need we, and that the Holy Spirit says where we're gathered, that's where the Holy Spirit's going to be more present. So I think we have to really trust that. So whenever especially when there's confusion, to bring in those discerning partners. And yeah, that's what I'd say. That we're always going to be in a little bit of conflict. At least I am, and we're gonna have to we're gonna have to bring in, even like I think about even communities leadership teams, right? They have teams. There's not just one person, you know, saying, Sister Liz, you go here and you do this, right? There's a team that comes together to pray and discern about what's best for the community. And I think that's a model because, well, first of all, it's biblical and it's worked and it still works today. And I think it's just really important. Um, anyway, I think I'll leave it at
you
that for now.
you mentioned the word detached. I think that might be a good something to flesh out for people of who do they let into the inner circle of their thoughts and feelings about going down this path, because everybody has their thoughts and opinions
That's right.
and they know what you should do, because
That's right.
it's easy to have an opinion about what someone else should do. Um, how
Yeah.
do you find those people, and who are they, and at what point do
Well, we've
you let somebody in on that?
we've already talked about spiritual director, vocation director. Um, you may already have some prayer partners. You may belong to like a faith sharing group. That kind of situation. You have family members, right? I mean, maybe your parents or siblings, people that already have been praying with you for some time. And those are all people that are in your prayer, that can be and probably ought to be discerning partners. But there is a person that I feel very strongly about. This is an Ignatian word, detached, right? Like, talked a lot about spiritual detachment. Um, I feel very strongly that you should have a detached person in that a detached holy person. And a detached holy person can't be a family member because they're not detached. They may be, they may love you unconditionally, but they are not a detached person. They definitely have um, some skin in the game, and they definitely have a desire for you, even though they're like, no, 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 you go be free. They can't help it. Your best friend is not detached. Maybe you've been dreaming together your whole life about raising your kids next door to each other. I mean, there's like They can't be detached. And they're not supposed to be. That's not the role that you've ever had in mind for you and your life together. Um, a detached person is sometimes like here, in my life in the Latino community, is often that abuelita that's at not your abuelita, but the abuelita at church, who leads the little prayer group. A very holy person who has acted as sort of like a pseudo grandmother to a lot of people in the parish. Very holy person who's just kind of grandmothered a lot of people and helped people grow in their faith. That's a detached holy person, somebody who you can share your journey with, who doesn't like what happens at the end of the journey isn't going to affect them, like except for their happiness for you. But whether you join the military, whether you go to this school, whether you marry this person, whatever, it's not going to affect their life, and they don't really have any skin in that game, right? Their only interest is you and your happiness, and that you find God's will. It's not going to change their life, and so they're going to be like kind of an open book prayer partner with you, and they're going to be able to be like a real good mirror back to you. A very
Yeah.
honest, open, transparent, safe place to place your questions and your concerns.
And all of
And
that gives good data, you know, that
mhm.
can kind of amalgamate into what seems to be clarity as to the next step. And I want to make sure
When
we.
we're in college, let me just throw, when we're in college, it's often the campus minister or a youth minister. I just want to throw, those are often good detached prayer
Yeah,
partners. I
good
just wanted to throw that
mentors,
out
good
there.
folks.
Yes. Yeah.
I want to make sure we hit on some of these steps because every community is different. And so
Hmm.
um, to touch on the practicals of when someone, is a pre-postulant, what does that look like? When do folks have to have their loans figured out? Like if they have student debt or um, personal debt. When what about, if they have properties or car or eh, do they have to keep paying on a house that they own? These are kind of maybe there are some communities they have to get rid of all that and even before
Right.
they can do the first step. So, how does that look with the Daughters of Charity?
So with the Daughters of Charity, because we're not a religious community, we're a Society of Apostolic Life. Some of that applies to us a little differently. In a religious community, you can't own property. You can't own a lot of that stuff. And we actually can own property. We can't necessarily owe money on it once we become a full member. Um, we can't necessarily be in debt with it, but we can continue to own property. Um, and that that happens especially in cases where families have immigrated and maybe the properties in the names of their children for lots of various reasons. So that there are some instances where that kind of thing has happened. They're just the debt can't be in the names of the children, so or in the name of the person entering. Um, so generally, when you're a pre-postulant, you continue with employment, either at your current employment or you might seek another employment while you live in community. Um, and that's great because if you have school debt or even personal debt, living in community can alleviate some of the other bills you have, and you can work toward paying that debt while you're continuing to work. And but you're also living with the sisters, so you're getting a taste of community life and what our life is like. And usually you're doing some, we don't really call them instructions, but some discernment activities with your sister servant or the vocation director during that time. That that little that stage is not governed by our constitution, so it's a very flexible stage in terms of time. It could be 6 months. It could be it's generally mostly it's 12 months for us, but it could be it could be 18 months. It could be 2 years. We get to do it gets personalized for the discerner. And then we go to postulancy, which is governed by our constitutions. It has to be at least 12 months. We've had some instances where it's a little bit more, but it's generally a year. We've had some instances where people are employed during that time in a daughter charity ministry. Um, and during that time, instead of a discernment stage, postulancy is our first formation stage, official formation stage. So we go from discernment stage to formation stage, living still on a local mission in a local community. We don't yet live in a formation house yet. You're still living with the sisters in a local community, but you're in a formation stage now. So you're starting to ask for permissions, not just communicate with your sister server, but you're actually having to seek permissions and stuff like that. Um, we're asking by that stage to, if you still have debt, to start wrapping it up. You cannot have debt by the time you become a seminary sister, which is what happens at the end of postulancy. So at the end of postulancy, because you become a member of the Daughters of Charity, a full member, really for us, not with all the full rights, but you still become a member, then there's no more debt at that point. And so you have to have both educational and personal debt paid off. If there are other arrangements that need to be made in terms of educational debt, once in a blue moon, the community might make an arrangement. Then it'll be made so that the debt is not your responsibility when you become a seminary sister. It's generally because of the way we work pre-postulancy and postulancy, it's taken care of by that point. So people become a seminary sister, and that stage is 18 to 20 months, about give or take 15, 20 months, 24 months. It has to be at least 12 months, but our curriculum runs at least 15 months. That's what I understand. And then that's when we live in a formation house together. And by then, no more employment, no more tax forms. That's when I think we experience. I just had some ladies ask me this weekend, like a lot of the insecurity kind of kicks in. No more vehicles. Sometimes people still have their cars postulant. It's not usually by postulancy you kind of have given that up. Um, but you're living in community together with the other sisters that are in formation, and and you're mostly, it's almost full-time study. You go to apostolic experience only 1 day a week, and then another day a week you visit the elderly sisters, and the rest of the time you're studying. And it's a pretty intense time. It's a pretty intense time.
There's some
And
deep dive happening during that
it's a
time.
deep dive. And I always
Hmm.
tell the ladies, that's when you're filling your tool belt, right? Because when you go back on mission, we have a long list that's called our horarium, all the things that we're responsible for as daughters of charity in terms of our prayer life. And many of those things we're responsible for accomplishing privately because we're a very active community. And we have to find the time and space to learn those things. We have to learn to accomplish those things within our day on our own. Not all of them, but some of those things we have to learn to accomplish on our own. And they don't just fall out of the sky into our head and heart. We need to. So the seminary gives us that time and space to kind of fill that tool belt and to fill our head and heart, so that we can go back out and live in our local community, back out on mission. Now they become so ingrained into us that they become part of our life. And we can live on mission now and just pull those tools out of our tool belt and live our life like the other sisters do. Because before that, when we were postulants and pre-postulants, we sort of saw the sisters, you know, we couldn't figure out how they were doing it. We didn't really understand. We saw the horarium, we just weren't sure how this was getting pulled off. They talked a little bit about it. We went to workshops to learn about it, but it was still kind of a mystery to us. And so we go to the seminar, we're like, because we have time to focus on it. It's a real special time. And we learn a lot about ourselves, because when you have time to sit and pray and think, lots of stuff surfaces about ourselves too. So we get the time to do that, to just kind of tackle it. And then you get sent on mission, and then you're a sister on mission without vows. And you do that for a couple of years before you make your vows for the first time. And you're living your life just like everybody else. Anybody looking from the outside would not know the difference between you and any other daughter of charity. And then we make our vows for the first time. That's kind of it in a nutshell. Um, we that's that didn't do it a lot of justice, but what that should tell you is that we get to practice a lot before we sign on that dotted line. Like we get a lot of practice to figure this out. We really get 2 years of practice before we kind of before we shed a lot of our stuff, right? Before we go to the seminary, before we go to the novitiate. And and 2 years is a good amount of time of living with the sisters and seeing how that feels and seeing if I fit in a little bit before I even take a more serious step. And that should bring a lot of peace at least. And that doesn't mean we still know even after that. Remember, we're just taking the next step.
Hmm.
We're just each time we're just taking the next step. There comes a point where we say, like at one point we say, look, we the Daughters Charity take annual vows. We don't take perpetual vows. But we do at one point we say, okay, our vows are annual, but our vocation is for life. There comes a point where we say that. But that's not right in the beginning. At first we're saying, I'm just taking the next step. I'm just
Hmm.
taking the next step.
I want us to make sure we hit on something we haven't talked about yet, and that would be the cultural, should we say, sensitivities that are needed or considerations. Everything from, I wasn't born in the US, and so does that disqualify me? My family is not in the US, or my family has certain obligations that I feel like, whether explicitly or implicitly, towards taking care of parents, or um, supporting older family members financially. So maybe we can touch on a little bit of those things when folks come from an immigrant home or immigrant background, as it relates to cultural values and expectations.
So it's kind of crazy, right? When you think about a family immigrating, especially if it's a refugee family or a family that immigrates from a very poor country. Um, and then they come here, they work very, very hard. And then one of their children, particularly a daughter, makes a decision to live a life and to even vow a life of poverty. Like it seems like the opposite of everything that family worked for. And it seems, in fact, it seems, I mean, poverty is not a good thing, right? I mean, like we we take it as a vow, like it's this really wonderful thing. The truth is, like, the Pope has letters about how awful poverty is. I mean, like it's crazy
Yes,
that
we're
we're like,
trying
oh,
to
let's take
fight
a vow of
against
it.
poverty. Now you want
We
to
are
live that.
trying, but we're going to purposely live it, right? So you can see where the confusion and the hurt and the pain might come in for a family who has done everything to keep this from being their family reality. And there may still be a reality in their family, but then somebody like purposely kind of goes against a very specific family value. So let me just throw that out there, right? Because sometimes we think like, well, doesn't a family think it's a special grace for somebody to become a well, no, no, because of what they're embracing, right? That's a challenge. I mean, we often think it's just about the grandkids. No, 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 no. Sometimes it's about this thing called poverty, and what an evil it was for them where they came from. So I just want to put that out there. That's one thing. And then what you're talking about. What is not an American value necessarily is this thing called interdependent family living, right? So my grandparents were immigrants, but my parents were not. So by the time we came around, we did not have this value in the same way, which was this interdependent living. So my parents did not expect me to necessarily be part of this family structure of like, okay, you will be in charge of the mortgage and your sister will be in charge of the light bill and you will take care of auntie and this person will help to take care of like very much intermingled interdependent living, intergenerational living. But that is very much true for most Latino and Asian families. This notion of interdependent, intergenerational living. And so when somebody from those cultures discerns that they have a vocation or potential vocation, the disruption that it causes to a family unit is great. So, sometimes you think, oh, a family's not being generous. Well, it's not about generosity. It is about great destruction and not destruction, excuse me, disruption, not destruction. Um, the whole family has to discern, not just that person. Like this woman's feeling a call, but she's like, wow, you don't understand. This affects not just my family here, my family, in the Philippines, my family, in Guatemala. Like everybody's affected by this, my one decision. Because maybe I'm the one person who made it to college and got this job who makes enough money to do these things. Like many people are affected by this decision. And so I think that we haven't, you know, it's so important that we, the community, very much respect and embrace the entire family and and talk about what our commitment is to the family. It doesn't necessarily mean like this, like some kind of monetary commitment. Although sometimes there's like a small agreement about that, you know, because of the impact. Because of the impact, and when I mean small agreement, like if a sister's going to go visit her family in another country, that we help her bring a gift to the family, um, especially if it's a family in great poverty. Um, but little things like that. So, although that's not little, I mean, I say it like it's not little. So the recognition of what the gift that that person is to our community, but the great sacrifice that that family has made. So it's not just a perceived or a not, a lived out sacrifice. Like, oh, she didn't have children, so I don't have my grandchildren. It is a very real, experienced in real time sacrifice. And so I think those are, in those cases, we spend a lot of time helping and discerning with the woman and her family. And, and I can't tell you, it just touches me. The, the beautiful journeys to watch families come to that place. And sometimes it means like whole refinancing of homes. I mean, it's really tremendous, what families will go through to
Well, and
support.
having sisters and lay folks that work with us to help navigate those waters of
Hmm.
titles and payments, and how do these financial realities shake out in the end. That's important because having experts available can make things a little bit easier as far as knowing information and the how to's. um, so maybe we can touch on some ideas about education levels and folks who come in with a certain career, and what is the recommendation about how people can understand their background. So as it relates to, one example would be, I came in and I'm a nurse. And so, like, what if the community asks me to do something different? Is that been wasted? you know, or if someone comes in and they don't have a bachelor's degree, or they barely made it through high school for whatever reason. And so
Hmm.
how do we view education at all those levels?
So I think, first of all, we're daughters of charity of St. Vincent de Paul, and we are called to serve Christ and people who live in poverty. So um, we are not, um, our our community does not focus on academics alone and education alone. And that doesn't mean that if we're put into a position we are definitely professionally prepared for it. So that's important to know. If I'm put in a classroom, I'm prepared professionally for that position. Um, I'm an educator by profession and academic background. I haven't done that for 15 years. I know I've done that for a long time. And what I mean by that is two things. One is some of our greatest saints in our community were like the least learned, St. Catherine Labouré. So it would be very dangerous for us to exclude people who struggle in terms of education. Like we would be very anti our history. That doesn't mean that we don't have, again, expectations that we would be professionally prepared in whatever we're asked to do within our ministry. But we have ministries that don't require much education also. And in order to stay true to our founding and our history, the expectations we have are that you can work in your professional setting. And if that's working in a soup kitchen, you can do that. And if that's working, at a child care center, it's that. If that's working in a healthcare center, then you have to be able to do that. The other side of that is, let's say you do come and you're an RN, and you say, well, I only ever want to work as an RN. Well, I also would like say, then you probably shouldn't come to a community because we can't limit ourselves to what we think the only thing God is ever going to call us to. Like we have to be open to the possibilities. And there's so many things out there that we have yet to imagine and that we might only find out through our vow of obedience. It's just beyond our imagination. And so the community generally wants to use our gifts in service of those who live in poverty. That is generally true. They're excited, we're excited, and especially if those gifts can help people who live in poverty. They're generally very excited about that. But there's sometimes our needs that we're not aware of. And we can't see how our giftedness will fit into that story just yet. So both of those are true. It's helpful to have, higher ed, because it just allows the community to place us in more settings. But definitely, I would say that in terms of a vocation director and what I'm looking for, I ask for one of two things from the women who are, discerning. I ask either for 2 years of college or 2 years of full-time work. So we have to see that you can work one way or another. Like if you've demonstrated one of those two things before you entered, then that satisfies that you're able to be in ministry.
I love the example of the accountants who have joined the community because you might say, like, what is an accountant going to do as a daughter of charity serving the poor? You'd be surprised what
Oh yeah,
accountants can do.
right. Yeah, we've got a few CPAs running around, and I mean they certainly help with finances, but they also help deliver meals to the elderly. They help, do all kinds of things. We have all kinds of interesting things happening. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So all of that is good stuff. I know we have to wrap up here, but what's your final thoughts on um, that person who's just kind of on the fence, or the person who's like, oh, that's real nice, but I got to live a little bit more life, or like I've got to finish school, or I've got to do X, Y, or Z. I've got to date some people before I do all this. Is there should be there be a sense of urgency for those who are kind of hemming and hawing, so to speak?
Um, well, I think I'm not sure about urgency, but well, maybe. I do say this. I say that not making a decision is making a decision. And there are some folks that I've been in contact with that, the perpetual discerners. We kind of talk about that in vocation ministry, the personal. Now, there are some people that legitimately are making their way through events and life and school and, all kinds of things, right? Or getting themselves healthy. There's all kinds of legitimate things. But then there's also just the perpetual discerner who who's not willing to make a decision. For whatever, a whole bunch of reasons. And this is what I would say: not making a decision is making a decision. And to a person like me, I'm less interested in, I guess, in all the, I was going to say it a little harshly, but I'm going to take it back and I'm going to say it a little more gently, you know and that is, God's dream for you is a real dream. And so God wants you to live it in real time, in real life. And you know, it's not something in the clouds. You may see it in the clouds. You can look up and see. I don't know, but it's a real thing in real time, in real life. It's the home that God has for you to live here on earth, right? Before you get to that eternal home in heaven. And so look for home, right? I just watched ET again for the first time in a long time. And you remember he's just trying to go home. He keeps saying home. I want to phone home. Trying to go home. And so you're looking for home on earth. And when you feel like you're at home, then you need, what, pack and go home. You need to do it. Um, and if you realize that you've been home the whole time, then start living your vocation. Start living it. It could be that was it the whole time, that you were called to be single, and then live it. Give generously. Give it all. Be generous. But start looking for home.
Mm. That's a great place to stop. It's look for home, y'all. Look for home. Sister Lisa, it's always a pleasure. Our prayers are with you in your ministry. And now that I'm in it also, it's some
I was
solidarity,
about to
sister.
say, welcome, bienvenida, welcome. I've been waiting to welcome you for years. I'm so excited about this. I'm really happy that we've been sisters on the journey for a long time, but now we're companions in a new way. So I'm really excited. We're going to see each other in a couple of weeks. I'm super excited about that too.
Yes, praise God. And we will see you guys in the next episode. Thanks for listening.